Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the massive, hidden financial engine that's really powering this whole 2026 AI boom. For a decade, AI was pitched to us as this abundant, neutral utility, right? Like electricity, just always on. But now that the dust is kind of settling on this huge industry build-out, we're finally seeing the actual architecture underneath. And what we're looking at is the final, absolutely crucial choke point in the entire ecosystem. It's the silent mechanism gating literally everything else.
Now, you might own the door, but who's funding the building? We've already looked at the physical stuff. Power, compute, data, models. Sure, you might own the rights to a massive data set, or maybe you built a slick new interface. But the real question is, who's putting up the colossal amounts of cash required to even sit at the table in the first place?
Which brings us to Section 1, the ultimate choke point.
If we strip this incredibly complex industry right down to its studs, there's one undeniable truth. Capital is the lever beneath the levers. It completely dictates who gets to build it all. Because every single component here costs serious money. A dedicated gigawatt of power? Phenomenally expensive. A cluster of 555,000 GPUs? Off the charts. These things don't just magically appear out of sheer coding brilliance. They require someone willing to write a massive, massive check. So whoever funds the build-out decides who plays. It literally doesn't matter how genius your model architecture is if you can't clear the capital bar to train it. And honestly, that bar is so incredibly high right now that it shuts out almost everyone. It leaves the future of tech resting in the hands of a very short list of mega balance sheet firms, sovereign wealth funds, and private credit giants.
And that leads us to Section 2, the bill comes due. Because eventually, those early investors are going to want their money back.
And wow, in 2026, did that bill ever come due? We are witnessing an absolutely unprecedented wave of IPOs. Within just weeks, the three most valuable private AI companies lined up to dump their private bets into public risk. Wall Street is suddenly being asked to absorb $2 trillion. $2 trillion. Let that sink in. On June 12th, SpaceX, which, remember, now includes xAI, listed on the NASDAQ. Initially priced at $135 a share, valuing it near $1.77 trillion, but it just skyrocketed past the $2 trillion mark in early trading. I mean, it even minted the world's first trillionaire. The offering was massively oversubscribed against the $75 billion target, and uniquely, about 30% of those shares went to retail buyers. The market frenzy here is just staggering.
But get this, that was just the opening act. Anthropic confidentially filed on June 1st at a roughly $965 billion valuation, almost $1 trillion, right after closing a $65 billion round. And what's totally wild about this? That valuation is sitting against about $47 billion in annualized revenue, and they are absolutely not profitable yet. The sheer scale of expectations baked into that number is, frankly, almost impossible to comprehend.
And then, of course, we have OpenAI. They're reportedly filing for a fall listing that's expected to land somewhere between $730 and $850 billion. They're asking the public for this monumental valuation while running a 2026 cash burn approaching $27 billion. It is an astronomical amount of cash just being incinerated to keep the engines running and the models training.
So stack those three together. We are talking about something on the order of $4 trillion in private value queued up to hit public markets in an 18-month window. Think about the gravity of that for a second. This is a massive, large-scale transfer of accumulated risk. Venture capitalists, early investors, insiders, they're handing their positions over to pension funds, index funds, and everyday retail buyers, at valuations set behind closed doors with zero prior public scrutiny.
And you really have to notice the stark contrast in where this risk is flowing. Ahead of their listing, over 600 current and former OpenAI staff already cashed out roughly $6.6 billion in stock on the secondary market. Think about that. The people closest to the actual numbers are taking their chips off the table at the exact moment the broader public is being invited to sit down. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean a bust is guaranteed, but man, it is a profound signal about who's actually holding the risk right now.
Let's move on to Section 3, the financial Ouroboros. We need to look behind the curtain and see where all this raised money is actually going.
Because the capital choke point in AI has a really weird shape. It doesn't flow out into the broader economy like building roads or bridges. It bends back on itself. It's a closed loop. Step 1, hyperscalers like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google pour billions into AI companies. Step 2,
Those AI companies immediately turn around and hand that money to NVIDIA for chips. Step 3. NVIDIA pours money back into AI companies or funds massive data centers, and the cycle repeats. The money just moves in a circle. Which means, as asset managers have pointed out, if any single node in this loop slows down, the whole entire thing slows down.
And to make it even more circular, a huge chunk of this capital isn't even cash. It's like getting paid in company store credits. Microsoft invests in OpenAI largely through Azure Cloud credits. Amazon backs Anthropic with AWS credits. These are captive currencies. You can't go spend them in the real economy. It is literally a financial Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail. You even have Elon Musk using SpaceX to acquire XAI from himself. The whole setup is just highly synchronized and totally self-contained.
So, what does this all mean? Well, this circularity creates two massive systemic risks. First, there's reflexive demand. Because these loop companies are just buying from each other, the revenue looks infinite, but that means one single pullback cascades into falling revenue everywhere. Second, mispriced capacity. These guys are making multi-billion-dollar capex decisions based entirely on demand signals coming from inside their own loop, rather than, actual independent customers out in the real world.
Which brings us to Section 4, cracks in the machine. Because when you have a debt-financed structure built purely on circular momentum, you've got to watch for hairline fractures. And in 2026, we are definitely seeing them. Morgan Stanley estimates global data center spending will hit roughly $3 trillion between 2025 and 2028. $3 trillion! But here's the terrifying part. About half of that is heavily burdened by private credit. This isn't just free cash flow. This is enormous debt-financed spending. The hyperscalers alone are projected to drop over $700 billion on AI infrastructure in 2026.
And this chart brilliantly illustrates just how fragile the whole setup really is. We've got an unbelievably slender base of real paying customers underwriting all these trillions in spending. By one estimate, only about 3% of consumers are actually paying for AI. 3%. That specific combination, enormous debt, circular internal demand, and a tiny sliver of actual paying users is exactly why economists are ringing alarm bells about the broader economy growing more fragile. This AI cluster is deeply, deeply intertwined with the entire market.
In fact, we can already see the first real crack forming. Microsoft quietly stepped back recently from its commitment to supply all of OpenAI's compute, letting Oracle and other neo-clouds step in to fill the gap. Look, this is a quiet signal of caution from arguably the most important node in the entire machine. In a system with no natural brakes, no one wants to be the first to slow down. But the second someone does, that illusion of endless demand shatters. This is exactly how synchronized machines break down.
Let's zoom out a bit for Section 5, the 6 AI levers.
See, we aren't looking at 6 separate stories here. This is one unified, stacked control structure. Think of it building from the bottom up. Capital sits at the base and funds the power. Power energizes the compute. Compute trains on the data. The data produces the model, and finally, the model reaches you, the human, through the interface. It's this massive vertical stack of dependencies, with capital sitting right at the absolute bottom, holding the whole shebang up.
The big takeaway here? AI isn't some abundant public utility. It's a scarce, controllable lever, and it's held by fewer and fewer hands. If you squeeze any layer, the ones above it immediately feel the pain. A government regulates the model, a landlord reclaims compute, a war restricts data. But crucially, if you starve the capital at the bottom, if that circular financing seizes up or lenders pull back, the entire stack contracts simultaneously.
All right, wrapping things up with Section 6, the final takeaway. Now, the bull case for AI isn't necessarily wrong, right? Demand is growing, and if we actually get those promised productivity gains, maybe this build-out pays for itself. But the structure itself is highly fragile. So if you're out there trying to build in this massive ecosystem, survival absolutely requires optionality. You can't outbuild the capital choke point, so you have to avoid depending on it. Keep your burn rate sane so you don't desperately need that circular money. Own the layers you actually can, like your data and your user interface. And honestly, self-host open-weight inference wherever the math makes sense. The only way to survive a credit contraction is to be solvent without needing the music to keep playing. Do not tie your fate to a single node in someone else's loop.
Because the era of AI is a carefree, endless utility, that's over. It's a lever. And right now, a remarkably small number of firms, funds, and governments hold all 6 points of control. They're financed in a circle, underwritten by everyone else buying in at the top of the market. The levers are completely visible now. The only question left is, whose hands are pulling your strings? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.